Hey guys, welcome to BudgetEDH. I'm your host Mike, and on this week's episode, we bring you Chatterfang, Squirrel General out of Modern Horizons 2. Chatterfang is 2 and a green for legendary creature Squirrel Warrior with Forest Walk. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus that many 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens are created instead. You can pay a black and sacrifice X squirrels. Target creature gets plus X minus X until end of turn. Chatterfang is the squirrel commander that we've been waiting for. Now, we had Tasky come out in Kaldheim that was also a legendary squirrel, but kind of left us wanting more on the whole squirrel commander theme. He was mono green. He didn't really feel squirrel tribal, but Chatterfang does. And not only that, you can build him in a multitude of ways. You can build it squirrel tribal. You can build it aristocrats. There's a lot of different ways you can go with it. So I really like Chatterfang a lot. I'm excited to build him myself. Now, obviously this deck, you can put a ton of squirrels in here. It can be your squirrel tribal commander. We opted to not really go that route in this deck. Now, there is some squirrel tribal aspects to it, so that is kind of like a sub theme to it because they kind of fit the theme of what we're trying to go for here. But this deck is going to make a ton of tokens because Chatterfang's going to basically double every token you put onto the battlefield by giving you a squirrel every time a token enters. There's obviously a lot of ways of putting tokens onto the battlefield. We have over 20 token generators in here, and we're going to maximize on that theme. In addition, Chatterfang is a sack outlet himself, which is awesome. We can cash in all those squirrel tokens to make Chatterfang a removal spell. So you can sacrifice those tokens and give something plus X minus X, or you can pump something up too if you really need to. We went even further into that theme and put a bunch of other sacrifice outlets in here because we do want to get value off of our tokens. This isn't going to be just put a bunch of tokens on the battlefield, pump them up with Craterhoof Behemoth, and call it a game. There's a lot of different ways to go with this deck. So we went with the aristocrat style. We have a lot of aristocrats in here that are going to drain our opponents whenever we sacrifice a creature or whenever one of our creatures die or whenever their creatures die as well. So we did lean heavily into that because it does play well into the strategy here because we're going to be putting so many creatures on the battlefield. It'll be easy to just combo out and kill our opponents with our aristocrats. There is one combo in here that's infinite that works really well with Chatterfang that we'll go over later in the video with one of the token creators that's in here. So there are a couple of combos in here. It's not really a combo deck, but if you do come across that combo, it's one card plus your commander. You basically can win the game that way. Let's quickly go over the stats of this deck. So we've got 12 ramp spells in here. We've got 13 card draw spells. The nice thing about these is a lot of them are repeatable card draw. So it's not just draw you a card. It's going to draw you a lot of cards whenever your creatures die or when they enter the battlefield, etc. We've got 8 ways to interact with your opponent, plus Chatterfang can interact as well. I didn't include that in there. And we've got 24 token producers in here. Main theme of the deck is to put as many tokens onto the battlefield so we can get more tokens off of Chatterfang, put a bunch of squirrels on the battlefield. We've got 15 aristocrats style cards in here. That includes the cards that are going to drain our opponents when creatures die and also the sacrifice outlets as well. So both of those are included into that category. And then we've got 37 lands in here. The asterisk is because 2 of those are modal double-faced cards. So let's get into the deck tech. Let's start this deck tech by talking about some of the ways that we're able to draw cards in this deck. So first up, we've got Skull Clamp. It's an artifact equipment that gives a creature +1/-1, and then whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. It has an equip cost of 1. This card is awesome in token decks. You can equip this to creatures that have 1 toughness and kill your creatures and then draw 2 cards. It's one of the most powerful card draw engines in a token deck. Then we've got Plumb the Forbidden. It's a new one out of Strixhaven. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice 1 or more creatures. When you do, copy this spell for each creature sacrificed this way. You may draw a card and you lose 1 life. Then we've got Fecundity. It's an enchantment. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, that creature's controller may draw a card. One thing to note with this is that this will also work for your opponent's creatures as well. So you got to be careful with this card on the battlefield. If their creatures die to something like a board wipe, they're going to draw a bunch of cards too. So you got to be careful with this one. Then we've got Tasky, Bearer of Secrets. It's a legendary squirrel. It can't be countered. It's indestructible and it attacks each combat if able. And then whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. This is an awesome card draw engine. It's It's a Legendary Squirrel, so it's perfect in this deck. If you can get in with your tokens, each one of them is going to draw you a card. If you get this on the battlefield, it's going to be really great. Next up, we've got Beast Whisper. It's a creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. This is another great card draw engine. We have over 30 creatures in this deck. Each time we play one, we're going to be able to draw a card off of it. Next up, we've got Moldervine Reclamation. Whenever a creature you control dies, you gain a life and draw a card. This one's awesome because it works off of any creature dying, even token creatures, which is what we want in this deck. This one's going to draw you a bunch of cards when your creatures die. Next up, we've got Shamanic Revelation. It's a sorcery. Draw a card for each creature you control. And then Ferocious, not as relevant in this one. You gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. Then we've got Return of the Wild Speaker. It's an instant. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. And non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. I like this card a lot. I put it in a lot of green decks. This is going to let you draw cards for your biggest creature on the battlefield, which you do have some bigger creatures in here. And it will also give all of your squirrels +3/+3 until end of turn if you need to get in for some lethal combat damage towards the end of the game. Next up, let's go over some of the Aristocrats that we have in this deck. Now, for Aristocrats, we've got creatures that deal damage or make our opponents lose life whenever one of our creatures, or some of them whenever any creature dies. And then we also have sack outlets, which we'll go over in the next section as well. So first up, we've got Blood Artist. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Zulaport Cutthroat and Bastion of Remembrance. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Bastion of Remembrance is nice because it comes with a token as well, which works well with Chatterfang. And then these drain all of your opponents all at once, not just one like Blood Artist. So I like these ones a little bit better. Then we've got Poison Tip Archer and Falcon Wrath Noble. Whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Falcon Wrath Noble, you would gain a life off of that one as well. Sir Conrad's one of my favorite Aristocrats. It's in almost every Aristocrat deck that I've built. It's an amazing card. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So basically, anytime something goes to the graveyard, it's going to deal damage to each of your opponent, which is great. It also has 1 in a black. Each player mills a card as well, so it helps you get that engine going as well. Next up, let's go over some of the sack outlets that we have in this deck. Now, in order to get our Aristocrats engine going, we do want some sacrifice outlets. The great thing about it is that Chatterfang is actually a sack outlet as well for your squirrels. But we want to be able to get rid of some of those other tokens that we're making in this deck as well, because we are making a ton of tokens. So first up, we've got Ravenous Squirrel. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact or a creature, you get to put a +1/+1 on it. And then you can pay 1 and Golgari, sacrifice an artifact or creature, you gain 1 life and draw a card. It's a nice card for letting you draw some cards whenever you sack an artifact or a creature. The artifact part isn't as relevant as the creature part, but we do have some ways of making food tokens in this deck. With Guillaume, you'll have the ability to sack those in for a card instead of the life, which is a lot better. Next up, we've got Viscera Seer, sacrifice a creature and scry 1. This is an Aristocrat staple. Doesn't cost you anything. You just sacrifice a creature to scry 1. It lets you sacrifice your tokens and get all those Aristocrat triggers off of them. Next up, we've got Vampiric Rite. This one's been being played a lot more recently with all the Aristocrat type commanders that have been coming out. It's an enchantment out of Battle for Zendikar. 1 in a black, sack a creature, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Next up, we've got Priest of the Forgotten Gods. Tap it, sack 2 other creatures. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sack a creature. You add black, and then draw a card. And then we got Emrakul's Evangel. It's a creature that you can tap and sack it, and any number of other non-Eldrazi creatures. Put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature token onto the battlefield for each creature sacrificed this way. So if you've got a ton of tokens on the battlefield, which we most likely will in this deck, you can sacrifice them all to put a 3/2 Eldrazi token onto the battlefield. And if you have Chatterfang out as well, you'll also make a ton of squirrels. This could basically just win you the game right on the spot by sacrificing all your tokens. If you have Zulaport Cutthroat or Blood Artist, something like that on the battlefield, you can sack all your tokens and you make a ton more and then sack them all again to something like Viscera Seer. This has a lot of combo potential in this deck. Next up, we've got Woe Strider. Enters the battlefield, you get to make a goat creature token, sacrifice another creature, scry 1, so it's got that Viscera Seer on it as well. And then it does have escape, so you can get this one back by exiling 4 other cards from your graveyard. And then another one that I like is Whisper Blood Liturgist. It's a legendary creature. You can tap it and sack 2 other creatures to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if your opponents get rid of some of your creatures, some of your better ones like your Aristocrats, some of your combo pieces that you have in here, you can use this to sacrifice 2 of your tokens to get them back, which is awesome. Next up, let's go over all the ways that we have of making tokens in this deck, and there is quite a bit to go over. So first up, we've got Necrogenesis. It's a 2-mana enchantment that you can pay 2 to exile a creature card from any graveyard, so that is important, any graveyard, to create a 1/1 Saperling creature token. Next up, we've got Jor-El, Monvoli Recluse. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 2/2 green cat creature token. There's a lot of ways of drawing additional cards in this deck. We have a lot of card draw engines in here, so you will be able to trigger this quite a bit. But the really nice part I like about this card is not only does it help you make tokens, but it also gives you a way of winning the game as well. So you can pay 6 mana until end of turn. Creatures you control have base power and toughness XX, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So you can pump up your squirrels like 7/7, and you can win the game that way, which is really awesome. Next up, we've got Grismold the Dreadsower. It's a legendary creature. At the beginning of your end step, each player creates a 1/1 green plant creature token, so this does trigger for your opponents as well. And whenever a creature token dies, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Grismold. So this is a nice card. It puts tokens on the battlefield, which is something you really care about. But then whenever those tokens die, which you will be sacrificing a ton of your tokens, you can pump this guy up. He does have trample as well, so you can get him for a lot of damage that way. Next up, we've got Scoot Swarm. It's a newer one out of Zendikar Rising. It's got landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. And then if you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. This one will get out of hand really, really quick if it sticks around on the battlefield, especially if you got those 6 lands out there. It'll start making copies of itself and just go absolutely berserk. So your opponents have to remove this pretty much ASAP, or else it's going to start to get real crazy. Next up, we've got Squirrel Nests. This one's in here for obvious reasons for the squirrels, and it's an enchant land. You can tap your land and create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. Fits well in the deck and makes tokens, which is what you care about. And it is a squirrel card, so might as well put it in there. Likewise, we've got Chitter Spitter. It's an artifact out of Modern Horizons. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may sack a token. If you do, put an acorn counter on it, which I really like because we do want to sacrifice our tokens and get some value off of them. The really nice part about this is squirrels you control get +1/+1 for each acorn counter on Chitter Spitter, so you can make your squirrels really big with this card. And then it also makes squirrel tokens as well. If you tap a green and tap it, it'll make a 1/1 green squirrel as well. So this is a really nice all-around card for the deck. Next up, we got a couple of the crazier ones coming up. We've got Pawn of Ulamog. Whenever it or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. And it has sack it and add a colorless to your mana pool. This is an awesome card. Now, the only bad thing about this, it does not trigger off of creature tokens, but if your opponents are about to board wipe, you'll get a bunch of tokens out of the deal. If your opponents use remove on one of your creatures, you get a token out of it. If you've got Chatterfang on the battlefield, it's just going to double up those tokens as well. Next up, we've got probably the best card in the deck, and it's really expensive. It's gone up quite a bit. It's Pityless Wonder. Whenever another creature you control dies, you get to create a treasure. Now, this card is insane with Chatterfang because it doesn't say non-token. It says any creature. So if you sacrifice a squirrel, it's going to make a treasure. And then if you have Chatterfang on the battlefield, it's going to make a squirrel and a treasure. Now you can see this is going to go infinite. So you sack that squirrel, get a treasure and a squirrel, sack the other squirrel, get a treasure and a squirrel. And now you're up 2 treasures and you have a squirrel. So you can just keep this going to get infinite treasures off of Pityless Plunder. It's probably the best card in the deck. It's definitely worth that $10. And it's probably only going to go up in price until it gets reprinted, which hopefully Wizards happen soon. Next up, we've got a new one out of Commander 21. It's Geom Master Chef. It's a legendary creature. At the beginning of your end step, create a number of food tokens equal to the number of non-token creatures you had enter the battlefield under your control this turn. Then you can pay 1 and sack a food. Target creature gains indestructible until end of turn and tap it. So like I said, we do have a ton of creatures in this deck. We have over 30 creatures in here, and this is going to give you tokens each end step equal to the number of creatures you put out. You have Chatterfang out, you're going to get food tokens and squirrels. This is just a really nice card in the deck. It does also provide some ways of protecting your creatures with your food tokens as well. Next up, we've got Erasta of the Endless Web. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, you get to create a 1/2 spider out of the deal. Then we've got Saperling Symbiosis. This is another expensive one, but I do feel like it's worth it in the deck. You may play it anytime. You could play an instant if you pay 2 more to play it. Put a 1/1 green Saperling creature token into play for each creature you control. That's insane because we're going to have a lot of tokens on the battlefield, so you're basically going to double up your tokens. Plus, Chatterfang's going to make another token for each Saperling you make, so it's going to get pretty nutty pretty quick. Next up, we've got Fresh Meat. It's an instant. Create a 3/3 green beast creature token for each creature put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn. This card is also crazy because it doesn't say non-token on it as well. So you can sacrifice all your creatures to Viscera Seer, all your tokens, and then get a bunch bunch of 3/3 beasts. If you have Zulaport Cutthroat on the battlefield, you're going to get all those triggers. You can sack them all again. It's going to make an extra squirrel for every beast put on the battlefield. Chatterfang out. This is an insane card as well. Next up, we've got Second Harvest. This one's another awesome one. For each token you control, create a token that's a copy of that permanent. So you're going to create a bunch of copies of all your tokens on the battlefield, and then because those tokens enter the battlefield, Chatterfang is going to put squirrels on the battlefield for each one. Then we've got Dray Keeper. It's a new one out of Modern Horizon. Enters the battlefield, create 2/1/1 green squirrels. You can pay 3 and a black. Squirrels you control get +1/+0 and gain menace until end of turn. I like this one because it gives you some additional reach for combat damage on your squirrel, and it kind of fits the theme as well for Squirrel Tribal sub-theme, which we're not really going for, but there is a little bit of it in here as well. Next up, we got Deep Forest Hermit. This is one out of Modern Horizons. It's got Vanishing 3. And when it enters the battlefield, create 4 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens, and then also gives all your squirrels +1/+1. Again, this is nice in the deck. It has obvious synergy with squirrels and Chatterfang. Also going to pump your squirrels up, and then if you have Chatterfang on the battlefield, you're going to get 8 squirrels out of the deal. Awesome card. Next up, we got a powerhouse. We've got Mycoloth. It's got Devour 2. As it enters the battlefield, it may sacrifice any number of creatures. This creature enters the battlefield twice that many +1/+1 counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 green Saperling creature token for each +1/+1 counter on Mycoloth. This is going to get insane. You can sacrifice all your squirrels to this. This is going to get a ton of +1/+1 counters, and then you're going to get a ton of Saperlings each of your upkeeps, which are going to double with Chatterfang, so it's going to get pretty crazy pretty quick. Ogre Slumlord's another awesome one. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may create a 1/1 black rat creature token, and then rats you control have Death Touch. This works off of any non-token creature dying, so not just yours, your opponent's as well. So you can get a lot of rats off of this guy. Next up, we've got Wolverine Riders. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. Whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to its toughness. I just like this because it works off of every upkeep, so your opponent's upkeeps as well. You'll get that 1/1 elf out of the deal. Next up, we've got Izoney Thousand-Eyed. It's a creature with Undergrowth. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token for each creature card in your graveyard. We're an Aristocrats deck, so we're going to have a ton of creatures in our graveyard more than likely. So you get a bunch of insects out of the deal when she comes into the battlefield. And then you can pay a black and a green and sacrifice another creature. You gain a life and draw a card. It's got card draw on there as well. Next up, we got one of the better token makers. We've got Avenger of Zendikar. When it enters the battlefield, you get to create a plant token for each land you control. Then anytime a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 on each plant you control. When this enters the battlefield, you're going to make a ton of plants and a ton of squirrels if Chatterfang's out. It's really awesome to put in the deck. It is a little expensive, so that's the one thing I'll say about it, but it has been reprinted recently a couple of times to drive the price down a little bit. Next up, we've got Sylvan Offering. It's a sorcery. Choose an opponent. You and that player each create an XX green treefolk creature token, and then also choose an opponent. You and that player each create X 1/1 green elf warrior tokens. This is awesome. It does give your opponents some creatures. You don't really care about it that much in this deck because you have so many ways of sacking those creatures and getting additional value off of them. But this is going to put a ton of tokens on the battlefield and just double them up if you have Chatterfang out as well. Next up, we've got a new one out of C21. We've got Pest Infestation. It's a sorcery. Destroy up to X target artifacts and or enchantments. Create twice. Let me say that again. Create twice X 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens. This card's awesome. It's going to get rid of problematic artifacts and enchantments, and it's going to put a ton of pests on the battlefield, plus squirrels if you have Chatterfang out. It's a great card in the deck. Next up, let's go over some of the utility cards that we have in this deck. We're going to start off by talking about some of the modal double face cards that I put in this deck. I like putting these in a lot of my decks because if you find them late in the game, you can use these as spells, but if you find them early in the game, you can use them as a land as well if you need a land. So that's a nice thing about putting these in your deck. You can almost count them as like half a land in your deck. So first up, we got Malakir Rebirth. It's an instant. Choose target creature. You lose 2 life. Until end of turn, that creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. I really like this one because it helps protect your commander and any other key piece that you have. So if your opponent goes to remove your commander or one of your other key pieces, you can use this to protect it. It will come back to the battlefield. Will also trigger any other death triggers that you have because it will actually die and then come back to the battlefield after that. Next up, we've got Bellagade Recovery. This is an awesome one. I've been putting this in most of my green decks. It's a sorcery, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. This is a regrowth on a land, so this will get you back any of your key pieces late in the game that you need to get back from your graveyard that your opponents may have removed. Next up, we've got another couple of ways of protecting your creatures. Now, we are playing a token deck, so you're gonna have a ton of creatures on the battlefield. We want some insurance against board wipes. So first up, we've got Wrap and Vigor. This one's an instant that lets you regenerate each creature you control. And then Golgari Charm, same thing. It's an instant that lets you regenerate each creature you control. I like this one better because it does have some other modes that may come up as well, like destroying an enchantment. This gives you some more flexibility in the deck as well. And then last but not least, I have Crashing Drawbridge in here. It's a defender. Creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. Now, there's not a lot of ways of giving your creatures haste in green and black, but I do like haste in this deck because we have stuff in here that can pump our creatures up or turn our tokens into Eldrazi's. And if you're able to do that, you can catch your opponents off guard if you have a way of giving your creatures haste, so you can swing in with a lot of damage if you're able to make a lot of tokens. So I do like this card in the deck for that combat damage when this can give you wins out of nowhere. Thank you so much for watching our video today. If you like this video and you want to see more Budget Commander content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also check us out on patreon.com/BudgetEDH. There's a bunch of different tiers and ways to interact with us outside of YouTube. We'll see you guys next time.